Hey there, everybody. Welcome to this episode of our show, True Data Ops. I'm your host, Kent Graziano, the Data Warrior. In each episode, we try to bring you a podcast discussing the world of data ops with people that are making data ops what it is today. So be sure to look up and subscribe to the DataOps.live YouTube channel, because that's where you're going to find all the recordings from our past episodes. If you missed any of the prior episodes, you always have a chance to catch up. Better yet, if you go to truedataops.org, you can subscribe to the podcast and get the notifications when we have new shows coming. Now, my guest today is Matt Aslett, who's the Director of Research and of Data and Analytics at ISG. He's actually a returning guest to the show. He was on here probably about this time last year, I think. So welcome back to the show, Matt.
Great to be here, and thanks for having me back on.
Yeah, so for folks that missed you last time, just give us a quick rundown on your background in data management, and everything that you do.
Sure, no, absolutely. So I've been an industry analyst covering the data and analytics sector now for almost 2 decades. So during that time, I've covered obviously a lot of the significant trends shaping the data management, database and analytics sector, including things like NoSQL, NewSQL databases, Hadoop, data lakes, data lakehouses, and more recently, obviously, DataOps, obviously we're talking about today, and also the emergence of data intelligence. And so I'm currently the Director of Research, as you say, for analytics and data at ISG, specifically ISG Software Research, which is obviously, as the name suggests, the software-focused research business of ISG, which is a global AI-centered technology research and advisory firm.
Okay, so in this season, we've been taking a step back and kind of thinking about how the world of true data ops has actually evolved and what we've learned in the last, basically 4 or 5 years since this all started. Now, last time you were on the show, you'd done a study about the data ops space and the vendors that were in that space, and that was very enlightening then. And now recently, ISG has just come out with a brand new, it's a set of buyer's guides this time on data ops. And say the least, there was a lot of progress, a lot of changes, and I think some surprising rankings, actually, when we looked at the rankings. So surprising to some of us anyway, probably not to you, because you did the research.
Well,
so if you could just give me a rundown. Yeah. So if you give me a little rundown on the study and what you've been seeing happening out in the world of data ops here in the last year.
Yeah, absolutely. So for those who don't know, so the ISG research buyer's guides. So ISG acquired Ventana Research, which has been doing these buyer's guides based on the value index methodology for about 20 years. So there's a lot of sort of background research that goes in there. But now the ISG research buyer's guides, what we do with those, essentially, we try to put ourselves in the shoes of somebody who is looking to assess software providers and products in a particular space. Obviously, in this case, data ops. And what we do is we create, an RFI, RFP style process where we reach out to the providers that we think, satisfy our inclusion criteria, and we ask them a series of questions around the product and customer experience, and then we basically rate the responses we get against sort of kind of a notional ideal of what we think a data ops buyer in this case ought to be looking for. And then obviously everybody gets a grade, and we end up with a 2x2 matrix, and all the providers positioned according to where they end up according to the scores. So as you said, we talk about the buyer's guide for data ops, but there were actually multiple reports here. So there's overall data ops, and then we also looked specifically at data pipelines, development and production, data orchestration, obviously, of those pipelines, data observability, and then specifically new this year was data products, which is obviously a hot topic and an emerging area. So it was good to add that to the mix. So there's a lot to unpack there. But it's obviously an interesting emerging evolving space, and in particular, I think we've seen, you know, say a few years ago, and particularly when we did this research last year, there was a clear difference between the sort of emerging providers who had picked up on data ops and were very much positioned as, you know, new products that enabled collaboration and agility and automation. And then you had, obviously, you've got the established data management providers, a lot of them, you know, with some existing traditional manual products, but those lines are blurring. I think, you know, we've definitely seen that some of the established vendors have caught up and have added the kind of capabilities that we would associate with DataOps now to their products. So it's not remotely that DataOps has gone away. In fact, you could sort of say that DataOps has kind of taken over, and that's why those lines are blurring. But, you know, they're still therefore, and I'm sure we'll discuss this, a need for potential buyers to be cautious of when they're evaluating, you know, looking not just at what products are called and what they're labeled as, but what they actually do. But, you know, it's definitely an evolving space and a very interesting one.
Yeah, and so give me your perspective on what is the definition of data ops. Like you said, it's just like
Right.
we're seeing everywhere, obviously with AI and Gen AI. It's like vendors are notorious for just relabeling functionality that they
Yeah.
have and going, oh, well, this is data ops functionality, or this is AI
Right.
functionality. And we've had all this all
Yeah.
along. So, you know, what do you what do you see data ops as being um, today? You know,
Right.
what is it? What is it in your view?
Absolutely. So ISG Research, we define data ops as the application of agile development, DevOps, and lean manufacturing capabilities by data engineering professionals in support of data production. So as I said, it encompasses multiple things: development, testing, deployment, and orchestration of data pipelines, along with sort of observability to improve the quality and validity of those type pipelines. And then obviously, as I mentioned, data products as potentially one of the ultimate outcomes of that process. Yeah, as you say, I think, you know, we were very aware when we put together the capabilities against which we judge the products here, that it's one thing, you know, there's sort of functional capabilities that data ops products have that overlap with some of the traditional products that, you know, may be
Right.
more manual in nature. So obviously we assess them according to them, but we were very careful to make sure we were not just assessing, but putting a significant weight to things like agile development, collaborative processes, you know, that DevOps approach, and you know, more modern data engineering approaches to data pipeline development and orchestration and observability compared to you know, the more traditional manual approaches. So yeah, it's yeah, and it was definitely a big part of the way we approached this from the start. As I said, putting ourselves in the shoes of a data practitioner, what would they be looking for that would identify product as clearly addressing their data ops requirements, you know, in addition to, you know, some of the sort of underlying core data integration and transformation requirements.
Yeah, and I think as soon as you said, you know, agile and DevOps features here, I mean, then we've stepped beyond, we'll say, the traditional ETL tools that we used to use in data warehousing, where it was, okay, yeah, we had a tool and maybe we could generate some of the code, but the version control, the
Sure.
CI/CD capabilities, incremental development, all that really wasn't there in the traditional
Yeah.
tools. You still had to do something else, right? It wasn't part of it. So that's and I guess that's where some people see, certainly I'll say, the rebranding of existing functionality, and where the traditional tools, as you said several times, manual, a lot of manual
Mm.
processes, they may be part of a data ops process, but in and of themselves they don't constitute data ops. They're just one little
Not
piece of it.
necessarily. I'd say some of those vendors, if you look at the old traditional products, absolutely, I'd agree with you. I'd say some of the vendors have been introduced, particularly in the last sort of 18 months or so, newer products that do have, you know, some of those features and capabilities that we do associate with, you know, with true data ops. So so yeah, as I said, that I think that's reflective of the fact that DataOps has, a few years ago it was kind of, it was new and emerging, and it was kind of defined in some ways, even though you had these sort of DataOps pillars that were clear about what it meant. It still was sort of almost defined as not being the old way of doing things. And I think now we see that a lot of the even the established vendors in this space, providers in this space, do have products now that would fit a data ops criteria. But yeah, as I said, buyer beware. It's definitely something to be cautious of if you're approaching this, to make sure you're looking not just at the product description, but actually the documentation itself, and the true level of, as you say, particularly when it becomes to things like CI/CD integration, AI capabilities, automation, things like that.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, it sounds like the seven pillars that we've been talking about for however many years it's been now, 4 or 5 years. Um, that's really kind of what came into play here. Is that's one of the ways certainly we tend to evaluate these things. Is like, do we have all the things you just mentioned? CI/CD,
Yeah.
collaboration, automation, automated regression testing. That's the big one that I still see kind of hanging out there. Is
Right.
how well are the products supporting that today? Because they certainly,
Yeah.
5 years ago, there were very few. There was some testing vendors. There was a couple of vendors that had good testing suites, but getting that integrated into the whole of a data ops process was not necessarily trivial.
Yeah. No, and that's a fair point. So yeah, as I said, we definitely, when putting this together, we're very mindful of sorry, the seven DataOps pillars, also the DataOps manifesto, and really taking into account those documents and the community, requirements as they had evolved over the years. There are definitely still some gaps when you look across. Generally, obviously, some products are better than others, as you suggest. Yeah, regression testing is one of those. The use of AI is another. Another I've seen as well, which is I anticipate we'll see a lot of innovation on in the next couple of years, is actually the ability to measure the impact of these projects, and actually
Right.
data about your data projects, so that the data ops teams can go to the businesses and say, look, we've delivered this level of improvement. That's always been part of the data ops approach. A lot of products are still missing those capabilities. A lot of that's still being left to the user to sort of, the metrics are there, some of the numbers will be there, but actually, reports and dashboards that they can send around and collaborate on with, people, more on the business side of the enterprise is still missing. So
Yes, that's
yeah,
the
it's still work in
FinOps.
progress.
That's
Yes.
the
Yeah.
FinOps.
Yeah. That's
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Because we a couple of years ago started talking about observability, and there was things like Monte Carlo and companies that were really focusing on observability, and that was really kind of observability around the data pipeline more than anything
right.
else, right? So we know, because that was always a question back in the day when I started with data warehousing. Is like, did the ETL process run? Right? Did it run last night? How much did we get the data we were expecting? If the numbers look off today, can we figure out why the numbers are off? And that's where I think that observability piece being integrated into a data ops process was very helpful. But yeah, what you're talking about now, I think, is what we call FinOps now, right? It's like, what's the ROI? Are we
Right.
getting the value, and how much is it costing us to do these things?
Right, exactly. Yeah, and that's a big part of the, as I said, the sort of the method, or the value index methodology that underpins the bias codes, goes back towards 20 years. And the ability, one of the things we assess there, is the ability of the provider to help the customer measure ROI. So we're not talking about here what is the ROI of the product, but how does the provider help the customer understand and measure the value of, in this case, obviously, the data ops or data observability product they are using, and report on that back to the business. Because if you can't prove you're benefiting. You as the user may know you're benefiting, and in multiple ways. But we obviously, as data, a lot of money being spent on data and AI related projects, a lot more focus from the CEO and board level now on what are we delivering, how are we delivering value, how is this delivering improvement. So yeah, a lot more focus on that side.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned data products as more organizations are focusing on delivering the data via a data product concept, if you will. Uh, Being able to have that feedback is probably even more important today than it was a couple of years ago.
Right. Yeah, and that's definitely, I think it's interesting. Obviously, the data products area is still evolving. We it was an area that was interesting to me looking at the providers in this space. A lot of providers are offering functionality that enable organizations to create and package data products, and deliver domain-based ownership and share those data products across the organization. Um, Less a lot of work in progress, let's put it that way, still are around things like data contracts, the agreement between the data owner and the consumer of the data. And also, yeah, as you said, actually we see as absolutely critical there is the ability for the data consumers to just rate the data product, comment on the data product. Is it a good, does it fulfill what it says it does? Is it a good data product? Can you trust, the trust score in relation to the data,
Oh yeah,
things like that. So that is still a work in progress. It's still relatively early stages, and some providers are further ahead than others. But yeah, that was interesting. It's interesting when these buyers guides give us the ability to look across. In that case, I think it was about 20 providers in the data products buyers guide. I think when you're looking across and you're assessing multiple providers, you could start to see where there's, yes, there's some that are ahead of the others, or where there's gaps that are commonplace across the providers because they're at the early stages of development.
yeah. So with you've been doing this research obviously for a couple of years. With the one we talked about last year and now this year, what's the most surprising evolution that you've seen?
Um, in some ways, but again, maybe this was because I was expecting expecting too much, because maybe I bought into the hype a bit. The level of adoption or the level of delivery, I should say, of AI based capabilities in these products is still early stages. If you think, we're going back to, about 2 years now of the use of large language models. There's a lot of obviously vendors talking about that. There's a lot of providers that have capabilities in development or in preview. When you actually, so one thing is important when we do these assessments, we are assessing what is generally available. We have an eye on what's in
What
preview,
can I
but
buy today and use?
yeah, what can I actually use today? Not what's on the coming up, well, not what's on the slides, what's actually in the documentation, as I said. And some of that it's still relatively rudimentary. There's a lot of use of obviously the use of AI for to ask questions of the data, for natural language query of the product itself, a lot of assistance. Not that I'm dismissing that as being useful at all, but I think there's a lot of scope in this area for documentation of data pipelines, summarization of data pipelines and the orchestration of those. And there are some providers that are doing that, but others are still at early stages. But maybe that was me, as I said, just getting caught up in when you've seen so many providers make announcements around AI as they have. It's easy to think, oh, everybody's doing it. And when you, as I said, when you do an assessment like this, where you look across the board, it's interesting to note that it's still relative. It is still early stages.
Well, and I guess that's one of the benefits of what you guys do and putting these buyers guides together is because as a organization, how many vendors did you evaluate? You
So
20
across
plus.
all the buyer's guides, it was I think it was 49
49.
Obviously,
Yeah.
not every provider was in every buyer's guide. It was roughly between 20 and 30 in each one. So
Yeah.
yeah,
And even that is a pretty substantial number for any organization, even a large global organization, to try to sift through that themselves and have to, basically host presentations from, 30 or 40 vendors and do their own sort of RFP process and then try to, there's always a question in my mind, where I end up getting called in for things like this is, do they even have the staff that could actually
right.
evaluate
Yes,
what we just talked about is this just hype in the slides? Does the product actually do it? But then even more
right,
so, it's like, do we need the product to do that? Are there,
right.
these features may be fantastic, but are they things we actually need as an organization? And to try to go through all of those vendors yourself with, to do that you'd have to have a pretty much a dedicated team of fairly knowledgeable people to do, which obviously, you do that yourself. That's what you do in your role at ISG. And you guys go
Yeah,
do that and basically have done that for the organizations so they can read some
yeah,
conclusions
absolutely.
and see what you've done.
Exactly, and when obviously each enterprise is going to be different in terms of their needs and requirements, and products they've already got and products gaps they're looking to fill. But yeah, the buyer's guide is definitely designed to at least give them a head start in doing that. We see a lot of interest, obviously, across the ISG client base in terms of, at least drawing up from a long list to a short list and identify which providers are worth spending more time with. Because, there are one of the things that is absolutely continues to be true in this space is the huge number of providers in the space. I mean, data observability in particular. So we only assessed 17 providers because we have a inclusion criteria, which is based on obviously the capabilities, but also the size of the company. But there was actually another 25 what we call providers of promise that we could have evaluated it in that area. So it's just a huge number.
That's a
Um,
lot.
it is particularly in that data observability space, and of course, not all of them are going to survive. Some of them will be acquired. Some of them will become bigger. Some of them will evolve into more general data ops providers, and some of them will disappear. And that's the challenge, obviously, as you said, from an enterprise looking at that number of providers. How do you begin to weed those out?
Yeah, I had no idea there were that many, in particular in that category, right? That
Right.
there's that
Yeah.
many out there. I think again, that's where I think your buyers guides are definitely a benefit to organizations because there's companies out there that you might not have heard of that might actually be on the top of your list. You do the evaluation and say, hey, you should look at if you want to look at a couple companies, here's the ones that you should look at, and they may be companies that these organizations have never heard of. So like
Yeah.
yeah, I think last time, like DataOps.live wasn't even in the mix, if I remember correctly from the last report.
Yeah, last time the company was just below the level of the inclusion criteria. So, but obviously, yeah, made the cut this time.
Yeah, yeah. So that's going to be people that are looking at the guide this time versus the one that they looked at it last time. You know, we're in there now. We weren't there before. Um, and I'm sure there are other companies obviously that you've uncovered in the
Right.
research that a year ago they weren't in the report. This year they're in the report. Um, and like you said, who knows what's going to happen with them? I guess that's part of um, the due diligence that a company has to do when they start looking at, are we going to pick up this kind of software? The company, how big is the company? Is the company growing? Is it likely to be acquired? I mean, when I first started with Snowflake back in 2015, that was like the biggest objection anybody had to Snowflake. It's like, well, the architecture looks great. This sounds wonderful, but you're not AWS. You're not
Right.
Azure. You're not Google. How do we know? And you're not Oracle. I mean, that's when I got most of that. You're not Oracle. You're not Teradata. How do we know you're going to be here in 3 years? Right? Is
Yeah.
this cloud thing really going to take? Is this little company that came out of nowhere, is it going to survive? And that was the biggest question. And obviously for the data ops space, observability, data pipelines, that's the same question, I guess, when you're looking at some of the newer ones, right? Some of
Sure.
the companies, like you said, some of the companies that have been around for a while have now added true data ops functionality. Those companies, okay, they've been around for decades potentially in the data space. You can be fairly confident they're going to be around. Then it's a question of, do they have the features and functionality that the newer guys have that really meet your needs, right? And that's a lot of the comparison and the matrices that you've done are going to help people
Yeah,
ferret that out, I guess.
exactly. Yeah, and that's part of at the heart of the buyer's guide. As I said, the methodology behind it is obviously we look at the core capabilities of the product itself for data ops in this case, but also things like manageability, availability, reliability. Some of just the core tick box items from an enterprise perspective, security, obviously, but also that customer experience. So as you said, there's vendors going to be around, it's established, that's not a problem, but does it actually fulfill the functionality we need? And the other side, here's a new vendor, great emerging, innovative functionality, but are they going to be there? And so if you tick both those boxes, that's how you get up in the top right of the buyer's guide matrix.
Yeah, and I guess this year, one of the guys, at least, DataOps.live ended up in the top three, if I remember our press release.
Yes, believe so. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, well, that was, I was
And
happy to see that, obviously. I guess we've done something right. We thought we were doing something right, so that's good. So, do you ever get into the buy versus build conversation with customers?
we do, and I'd say certainly less so in this area than say a few years ago. I think a couple of years ago, when a lot of the functionality, the products that were evolving in the space were less mature. You could make an argument for potentially building some of these capabilities yourself, particularly if you were complementing an existing investment. I'd say these days, the number of providers, as we've already discussed, that are out there, the breadth and the depth of functionality. I think the level of investment required to not only develop but build it yourself, but also maintain it yourself. I think you'd be hard pressed to make that case these days, especially with obviously, and DataOps Live is a good example of this, but there are others obviously as well, where you've got an increasing number of providers now that can span all the capabilities that we addressed across these multiple reports. Obviously, not as I said, not every provider was in every report, but there is a core set of providers now that have that breadth and depth of functionality, and I think
They're
to
really
try and
hitting all
re-
7 pillars.
and to try and replicate that
It's a lot of
yourselves,
work.
it's a lot of work. And as I say, not just upfront development, but maintaining that going forward as well.
Yeah. Do you think if an organization isn't considering looking at some of these data ops products, are they out of their minds to try to scale these days?
I mean, yes. I'd say, I can't, unless you're a very established organization with a lot of products investment that's been made, and you're not looking to spend any money on data and analytics. But I can't think of
Who
any
isn't,
company
right?
that would fit. Yeah, no, exactly. So yeah, in short, yeah, you all enterprises should be considering these products. I mean, there then is a question of, when do you begin to
Right.
invest in addition to what you have or replace what you've got. There's some complex, obviously, investment decisions to be made. But yeah, given the focus on data driven approaches, and particularly AI. I mean, I haven't even talked here about, obviously, the importance of data pipeline development and orchestration and observability to AI, beyond just
Yeah.
more traditional analytics. So yeah, they definitely should be part of every organization's strategic thinking, even if the actual purchasing decisions may be further out.
Yeah, I remember early on when I was working for Snowflake, they'd come up with a statistic. I can't remember who it came from that said they had done a survey and only found like we were looking at companies that were intending to move towards data driven decision making, and there was only like 76% where yes, we want to do data driven decision making. And so I kept asking the question, it's like, well, what about the other 24%? They don't want to
Right.
give data based decision making. And it's like I think those are companies you definitely want to stay away from because they're gonna disappear in the long term. And I think that's what we're saying today. And even now with like you said, the people looking towards AI, right? The data feeding your AI and your LLMs, it has to come from somewhere. So we are talking about
Yeah.
data pipelines and data quality and orchestration and observability. All of that comes into play if you're going to be trying to run any part of your business off of AI, right? And have any
Yeah.
level of confidence, right? Yeah, it's
Absolutely. Those good data management practices have been there forever, but what we do see is AI is a real forcing function for, particularly
yeah,
as a lot of these decisions are coming from executive board level and they want to see results because they're
yeah.
making big investments. And so, yeah, so absolutely is forcing people to not rethink their data management, but absolutely
Take it more
prioritize.
seriously.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay, so where can folks get this buyer's guide that we've been talking about, the guides?
So they're available from ISG Software Research. I think we've got I'm missing the word, a link there.
QR
Let's
code.
put it
Yeah.
that way. QR code, that's the one. Yeah, so you can scan that and find them there. Obviously, if you go to ISG Software Research website as well, everything's under buyer's guides. You can just you can actually search for a particular topic. You can search by vendor, and so yeah, they're all available to register and download.
So, anything coming up for you? You're going to be hosting any events or webinars or anything else in the near future where you're going to be?
Yeah, so I mean, there's obviously a lot of interest in this area. So and obviously conference season's beginning to kick off. So we got some webinars in the works, some presentations around both data ops and data integration, data intelligence I mentioned earlier. So um, and we're just kicking off actually the next buyer's guide, which is kind of related, which is specifically on real-time data as well, streaming data and events. So a lot of
Oh, good.
focus on that as well. So it's it aligns nicely with data ops and data intelligence and data platforms as well. So I see you've got the QR code for the LinkedIn there. Obviously, we'll be posting all the details up there as and when they're available.
All right. Yeah. So everybody can link with you, connect with you on LinkedIn. And if you do decide to connect with Matt on LinkedIn, do me a favor and put a little note in there that you saw him on the True Data Ops podcast, so he knows why you're reaching out and what bits you actually know already. That's always helpful. Yeah, it's better than getting just a blind connection request.
Sure.
All right. Well, we're at time here, Matt. Thank you so much for your insights and being on the show today. Thanks
No,
everyone
pleasure.
else for joining in, and those of you who were on live with us are going to watch this on a replay. Again, thanks and glad you were able to join. Hope you got some value out of this. You can join me again in 2 weeks when my guest is going to be one of my buddies in the Agile world, author, thought leader, and Agile data expert, Scott Ambler, is going to be on, and we're going to talk about data ops in the Agile data world. So Scott's written quite a bit on this, so I think it's going to be a really exciting session. I just recently got to take a workshop with him on continuous data warehousing. So we're going to talk about that. So that'll be in 2 weeks. So as always, be sure to like the replays from today's show. Tell your friends about the True Data Ops podcast. And don't forget to go to truedataops.org and subscribe so you don't miss those future episodes. Until next time, this is Kent Graziano, the Data Warrior, signing off for now.